So yeah, just excited to be out here, and it's a beautiful place to be, and it seems like we're all here on the same mission of helping people, and I love that. And we have a lot of different ways to get at that, and a lot of different challenges. And I love that panel yesterday that just kind of talked through, like, I've just not thought about the challenges of U.S. Federation Soccer, and had a great conversation with rugby, and just, I know a little bit on the military side, but then we just think about like all these things that we're trying to do. Like, we're all trying to get after the same thing, but we've got a lot of different ways to get after it. But I think we're all uniquely just trying to advance human performance, however we define that. And I don't know, it's something about being out here, and I just started meditating, a couple weeks ago, so I feel like, I don't know, more clairvoyant and out in the mountains, but just everybody in the same room, and just kind of thinking back to, it's good every once in a while to just step back and, like, because got my head down doing stuff every day, but like to see how far we've come in the last 5 years. And then having, a lot of the people in the room that we've worked with, like Tricia said, and I was thinking, like, how did I get here? Like, a lot of really lucky things happened for me to get here, because I started out as I still am, just an engineering nerd, but I love military, I love athletics, and somehow I just fumbled into human performance. But a lot of lucky things happened along the way, and I was in the lab at the Air Force. I was just making gadgets. I didn't know why I was making them. I was just trying to make things to do like real-time blood and sweat patches and stuff like that I promise these things will happen one day. They're just really hard. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just thought, like, this doesn't exist. We should probably try to do it. But I didn't have any context of, like, why is this important? Why are we really doing this? And then I had a day where I just wanted to take a break, and I went off base to Starbucks, and I don't know, I was Googling. This was, I don't know, probably 5.5, 6 years ago. Kind of before the massive boom in wearables, and just looking at stuff, and Adidas had a couple products. It was an Adidas watch, and then something you put on your shoe, gave you some distance information, some gait information. I was like, this is pretty cool. Why don't we just buy everything out there and just see what it does? And I'm going to use research dollars to do it, right? So it seemed like a fun thing to do. Those products are off the market now, or they don't sell them, or I don't know what they're doing. But now there's a million things out there. But that was really my first pivotal moment of, like, what is this, and how can we actually use this data? And I'm a sports junkie, so I just started thinking about, like, how could this actually be relevant to performance? Then as I was thinking through that, like, okay, let's just try to understand everything that's out there, and what we could possibly do with it. And that's when the human in the loop kind of hit me on the head, like, okay, I need to understand why we're doing this. And so I had an idea. I'm a born, raised, massive Buckeye fan, so, like, all right, I just want to see how people are doing this at a really high level. I kind of just want to see the facility, so I cold called Ohio State. They actually wrote me back on email, invited me up, and that's when I kind of saw that these missions are aligning, right? So they're trying to answer the same questions we are, but there's a lot of different ways we can get after it, and that's when that collaboration really solidified. I said, like, hey, let's figure this out together. Like, they were starting to dabble in technologies, figure some things out. Said, like, hey, what if we help you out with that, and we try to figure these things out? And then I got to know Anthony Schlegel there, who I'm still really good friends with, and we're still kind of doing some things. He's got a really successful company right now in Columbus, doing a lot of human performance stuff. And we were sitting down trying to figure out how to do this. And then Phil Matus, who's Mick Marotti's #1 guy right now, he was like, hey man, what about the autonomic nervous system? And I acted like I knew what that was. I didn't. I was like, yeah, we should definitely look into that. And then I just scrambled, and I looked up some devices, and I found a MegaWave. I reached out to Tricia. We bought some MegaWaves. I kind of told her what we were doing. She was like, you got to meet this guy, Mark, who's here. So Mark Stevenson. And that's kind of where everything just evolved from there. So everything I'm showing you, like, I didn't invent anything or come up with anything. I'm just learning from good people along the way. And Mark was nice enough to invite me down to where he was at, and spent 2 full days of his time with some guy that just said, like, hey, I want to do some stuff. And I probably completely overpromised what I was doing. But we had this idea of, like, what if we take all this information and put it into one place? We got wearables and we got all this stuff, but what if it went into one app or an iPad where coaches can look at things and an operator can look at things on their own app, and we can get a red, yellow, green, and pretended like I knew how to do it. But I didn't, and just said, like, yeah, that's what we're trying to go after. That's what we're trying to do. But fast forward 5 years later, like, I think we have a lot left to do, thousands of things left to do, and it will never stop. But we actually kind of have it, right? And so we're doing it. And I think a lot of us in the room are doing it at a pretty high level. And yeah, we haven't figured, we're just, touching the surface of this, and we have all sorts of things that we can do. But like seeing that slide that Marcus showed about, SOCOM is now adopting this, right? So that's a pretty massive thing, because when we started on this, it was people all along the way telling us every reason why we can't do it or why we don't need it, or there's always a roadblock. And Adam knows, like, every day there's a new roadblock that comes up that somebody just invents a problem, and we just solve it and keep going on. But these things are happening, right? So really what we're trying to do now is how do we keep pushing the envelope, and how do we just get creative about solving all these problems? Like, we all have things that we want to try to figure out. Let's do it together. And I think one of the things that has driven us and the lab at AFRL and all sorts of people we work with is we don't want to do science for the sake of doing science. I mean, there's basic science, which is great, and they should do that and solve the world's problems and all that kind of stuff. We want to do applied research, and we want to make sure that anything that we're doing has direct application to the people we're trying to help. And we want to help a lot of different people do a lot of different things. But if what I'm doing on a daily basis doesn't have a direct or potential impact on the people we're trying to work with, it's not saying everything's going to work, because lots of things aren't going to work, and I do things all the time that fail miserably. But when we find the things that work, that's where we want to go. So that's what excites me about being in places like this and talking to everybody, and the conversations we've had is like just understanding like what are the needs of all these different groups that we're trying to help, and how do we drive the science and the research to do that. And obviously, I'm a big Smartabase homer. I've been using it for a long time for a lot of different reasons. But I think this is gonna change the game, because I'm privileged to see a lot of different places, athletics, military, clinical populations, and there's just data everywhere, but it's completely unusable because it's in different places. It's not formatted right. Like, if you want to do a epidemiological study, like that's a grind. Like, you got to find the data, you got to figure out all these things about it. But now we've got an infrastructure that can put these things together, and just being able to see things that we've done with NHRC out in the field and like doing legit research in the field, but funneling it all into Smartabase, making it usable. And now you can get big brains off somewhere else, and like the DARPAs and whatever else, like they can do some crazy things with the data on that, but practitioners can do what they need to do during the day as well. So I think that's what's 100 things that are really exciting, but that's what probably excites me the most, is what we can do, and this is enabling technology and a force multiplier to do that. So what I want to talk about a little bit is, I'm lucky to see a lot of different things and talk to a lot of different people, and I'm kind of seeing some emerging trends along this space, right? So, we're trying to measure things, understand them, and do things to make our people better, right? But there's a lot of things that go into that, and it seems simple, like I'm just going to put a bunch of sensors on you and magic's going to happen. And you can do that in a lab, but we're in the real world, right? And so you have to think about all the personalities, all the cultures, all the things that are going on. And that's what's kind of hit me, because every place I go into, it's a little bit different, and you just got to kind of feel your way through that. And I think the first thing to kind of look at is just the overall philosophy. And I know a few people have talked about that the last couple of days. And Darcy Norman gave an awesome talk out at the TSAC Leaders Conference about a year ago, kind of talking about that, of coming in and putting a human performance team together and being on the same page philosophically, and making sure, we all want to help the people that we're trying to help, but how are we going to actually do that? And making sure there's no roadblocks and no naysayers, and we've got it all aligned. There might be some hard conversations that happen there, but you got to start with that philosophy. And this is our philosophy at the Rockefeller. So we kind of try to drive that as well. So once you got the philosophy down, it comes down to culture, right? So if you know why you're doing things, or somewhat how you're going to do things, now if you're implementing data and technology and some things that might have some super old schoolers at your place, or people that are resistant to things, and I know we've got a lot of friends here that we work with that have some of those issues, but how do we get the entire staff on board? And that's just the staff side, but now you've got the people that you're trying to take care of, so they need to understand that as well. Like, why am I doing all this stuff? What does it really mean? So that's establishing that nice philosophy and that culture. And then communication is critical with all this, just constant driving communication. Because if you've got those two things set right, but you're not communicating on a daily basis with your staff, and especially with your athletes or operators, that's probably one of the most important things that Steve Tashian has taught me. So he's the high performance director for U.S. men's national soccer team, and I got to know him with the Columbus Crew. And it was just simple. It's just daily wellness data, which seems like it's not all that important and easy to do in 1 to 5s, but that drove his communication every day with his players. That's the first thing that he saw. And he would look at that data and he would talk to his players and actually really drive in and see how they're feeling, what's going on with your data. And that helps just establish that communication. But then the player knows that you care and you're using that data. So it doesn't all go in a black box and just, why am I doing this? And I've seen it on the flip side too, where it's just not communicating with the athletes and they're doing 100 things, they don't know why. And they're wearing all this stuff, but practice isn't getting any easier. Then they get really mad and get frustrated, and it can just snowball in the wrong direction. So the more that you can communicate on that staff and athlete side, that's huge. And then like two of the things that I think are big challenges, and some things that concern me a little bit, are we need to invest in the people first. I know it's easy to buy technology, and that sounds really weird for me to say because I'm an engineer and I love gadgets and I don't usually work with human beings. And I just want to buy more stuff. But what I'm seeing is like, especially on the collegiate side and a little bit on the pro side, like they will drop $100,000 on technology without thinking twice, but will not, more on the college side, will not hire a human being to operate the technology or understand the technology. Like, we still don't have a full-time sports scientist at WVU, and we're, a pretty big school. There's only a few places that have one. I think Northwestern said yesterday they don't have like a dedicated sports scientist. But now you're trying to help hundreds of student athletes, and you've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of technology. So that's what concerns me, is like just that resistance to actually invest in people. But that's what's got to be first in my mind, is get the people first and technology second. So I hope we're getting to a better place in that, but that's going to take a while. And on the military side, like lots of exciting things happening, but if we don't have somebody, it starts with having somebody that cares at each place. You got to care about the data. Like, we're all trying to help people, but somebody's got to care. So if we've got all these great sensors and cool dashboards and we got millions of them, somebody's not looking at that data and doing anything with it. Why are we doing that? And I've had, one of the teams that I work with, we had everything amazing last year, had a guy that was just like super into it, understood it. He would call me every single day and we'd go through stuff. He took a new job, went somewhere else. So culture's same, philosophy's the same, but I lost the guy that cared. And so now I don't hear anything. And so that worries me. Like, either I did everything amazingly well and it's a perfect system, which I don't think that's the case, or I lost that person, right? So having that person, but now on the military side, we've got to have that person at each place. And that's just the I care about it person. But now as it starts scaling up, it's I got to do this person. So I got to like literally pair devices, and I got to figure out usernames and logins, and something's going to break every day. And I always get those calls. I can't field all of them as we keep scaling them up. That's why I keep telling people, but they keep calling me. But that's kind of what we see. As we scale up, we've got to have those people built in, so let's invest in the people. Then on the tech side, so it's exciting that there's a lot of really great technology out there. Like, that's enabling us to do a lot of things, right? But we have to understand everything about it. And that's a hard thing to do, especially with you guys that are grinding 16, 18 hours a day working with athletes and operators. Like, you don't have time to do that. You just want to know what works, and you want to know how well it works. But with all that good technology out there, you got people selling you stuff, and some concerning things of that, just saying like, hey, I've got this magic crystal, and I can take you in off the street, never seeing you before in your life, and I can wave this magic crystal and somebody who's not even trained waving the magic crystal and saying, it's your probability of getting injured, and if you do this, you're not going to get injured. So ask anybody in this room, like, you can't do that. That's impossible, right? That's magic. But you've got some people that might be starting to say that. So we just need to be careful about that and just understand. And that's going back to what David Martin said yesterday. Like, that resonated with me, and that stuck in my head. It's that bottom right quadrant of you've got athletes that believe in a thing, or a staff member that believes in a thing, and no disrespect to them, like maybe they just don't know and it looks good. But it's that belief factor. And now that skews expectations. So now if you got somebody that says like, I just need 30 seconds and it's going to give me this magic answer. And even if we say like, hey, these are my concerns about that, now that's their expectation, is like, any technology I bring in, if you can't tell me in 30 seconds exactly what's going to happen, I'm not going to look at it. So I'm still trying to think about that bottom right-hand corner and how we're supposed to deal with that. And I think it's that constant education. Sorry, I'm not used to being Britney Spears up here. But like, how do we navigate that? And I want to talk to David more about that. But I think it's a challenge for the room. Like, how do we really start getting at that? And some people are just like, I've lost battles, just like, all I can do is tell you my concerns and try to be calm about it. And I get fired up about some things, but I'm just trying to be like, these are my concerns about that. And a lot of times they just like, that's what they say they can do. Like, I can't do anything about that. All I can do is educate, and you're going to make your decision. But I can keep driving the research forward, and I can at least take nuggets out of that and say like, okay, this is where we need to get. We need to make sure everything that we're measuring has some actionable quality behind it, right? And so I know that's a hard thing to do, but again, we can't just collect data for a year and then tell you an answer at the end of the season, say like, hey, I could have predicted that you would have lost, and I've done that before, and it did not go well with a coach. This is what happened in your data. This is why you lost. And they're like, get out, man. I don't want to hear that. So that was a mistake I made once, and I'll try not to do that one again. So yeah, let's drive into some of the advances that we're trying to make, and where we're really trying to drive that research. to the forefront of actually applying it to people we're helping. And we've got a big mission at the Rockefeller, and so that link up there, if you guys want to take a snapshot of that, there's just some, Dr. Ali Rezai is the reason we're at the Rockefeller, and he's doing some just game-changing stuff. So he did a TEDx talk at WVU. So when you have 30 minutes, I'd recommend watching that, and has not a lot to do with the performance stuff that we do, but just inspiring. Like he's got some ridiculous things going on. He's doing non-invasive reversible opening of the blood-brain barrier to actually look at directed drug delivery to the brain in Alzheimer's. And like you think about Alzheimer's, you can't clear out the plaques because of the blood-brain barrier. He's doing it non-invasively. Like you'll just hear these snippets in there like, oh my God, did you really just do that? And he'll talk about it in 30 seconds and then go on to the next thing. So just inspiring stuff. And that's kind of what drove us to the Rockefeller and do some things. But, we're really focused on high performance. I do want to point out, I've got my team members here. So Andrew Thompson and Jason Stone and Jad in the back. So now I've expanded my builder pool at WVU from 1 to 4. So a massive increase in our in what we're doing there. But this is kind of getting at, and we took a step back, about a year ago and just thought, what are we really trying to do? And we want to do a lot of things, and we've got big goals, and we've got ways that we're going to get at some of this. But this is our opportunity to now go across different populations and really simplify things. And how are we looking at just human performance and health and wellness in general? So we've got our chronological age, right? So chronologically, I'm 42. Biologically, hell yeah, I'm 31. I did my telomeres a few months ago. I'm not sure I believe it now after seeing that data. But I mean, these are kind of cool enabling things, but that's what we're trying to do. And obviously there's a lot of things we can't prevent. Some diseases are inevitable and they're going to happen, but let's take a different mindset of these things. And yeah, we deal with high performers, but we deal with staffs, like super unhealthy staffs that are just overstressed and aren't making good life decisions and, focused on what they're focused on, but how do we take care of people and really change our trajectory and really reduce that biological age? So that's kind of the foundation of everything that we're doing is really trying to get at that. And the method that we do it is not dissimilar from a lot of other groups. You just change the words, do the same things. But this is really what we're at. It's like now that we've got enabling technologies that allow us to measure a lot of things in around about the human body. So how do we really take that information? And at the core of it, it's understanding the quality of this data. It's got to be good quality data, garbage in, garbage out. And had a great chat with Clyde before this. And even if it's just knowing the limitations of the technology you're using. So I know there's logistics, and that's why I try to factor, and that's why working with real humans and real staffs come in. Because if I say hey, I want to know exactly your sleep staging. I mean, Rachel showed you a picture of that. You can't do that, right? So if I want to know exactly to the minute how much deep sleep you're getting, you got to do that. Okay, we can't do that. So we need to understand logistics. As long as we understand the limitations to that tech and how we can use it, and sometimes it's just, hey, I'm not a firm believer in the quality of this technology, but if it's motivating and it's allowing an athlete to make better decisions, and we just understand the limitations of it, I can accept that. I don't love it, but I'll accept it if that's what's going to happen. And just understanding logistics around a lot of it is, cost. Like first question, it's probably annoying to any company, because I'm supposed to be a scientist. First question I always ask when they pitch something is like, how much does it cost? Because if it's $100,000 a unit or something, I can't ever, if it's the best thing in the world, I can't scale it, right? So knowing just, cost, logistics of day to day, how easy is this thing to use? What's the battery life? That drives a lot of decisions that we make. But obviously accuracy is number one on that. Second is okay, now once we have all this data, what the heck does it mean? What's the context behind it? What are we really going to do with it? And then this is the one I've been really excited about the last few years. Is if we dial that in and do this perfect, if we don't do this, we shouldn't do any of that other stuff. Because if I don't know what to do with it, there's no reason to do it. Maybe it's a science project in a lab study, and that's fine. But for everybody we're trying to help, we've got to understand how to do that. I'm going to make 2 pitches for this, and this is the perfect audience for this. So I will be your friend forever if you take a picture of that and do the survey. So right, we do it. AFRL does it. Lots of other good groups do it. This gold standard testing and just literally how accurate is this thing. But once we have that data, we can publish papers, and we've got some on deck that will show you literally how accurate is this thing by beats per minute or yards or whatever it is. But nobody's really telling us how accurate does it need to be, right? So there's no governing body that says this heart rate sensor has to be this accurate. So what we're curious about is there something along the community, like is there a consensus with us of literally with a heart rate monitor, are you gonna trust the value of this data if it's plus or minus 5 beats per minute, 10 beats per minute, 15 beats per minute? And even looking at the different staff members in an HP, so strength conditioning, sports med, athletic director. So this is open to tactical athletics, health and wellness. We've got questions in there that are kind of driving in who you are, but that's what we want to try to figure out is like all these different types of technologies. Is there a consensus for strength coaches? Like it's how accurate a heart rate monitor has to be. It's how accurate a GPS needs to be. So then if we have these papers coming out that tell you how accurate each thing is, and we have a consensus, that helps you make that decision of like, oh, that one fits here, and we think it needs to be this much to make decisions, and then factor in cost and logistics and all the other stuff, then hopefully we can start making better decisions on these things. Okay. I'm going to show that at the end too, and I hope we have a big uptick in our surveys because we're struggling right now. So this is kind of the strategy that we've got at the Rockefeller. And again, we're trying to answer a lot of different questions, and we found that our number one customer is the military. So we're hugely military focused in what we do, and a lot of the questions we want to answer in the military are really hard to answer. We've got a lot of times a complete lack of control of what's going on, and I don't know exactly what's happening. So to think about a scientific study, like any not applied scientist would look at that and be like, it's impossible, we can't do it. Well, that's not acceptable. So we do want to understand as much as we can in that context in a real environment, but that's where athletics gets important to us because now I know what they're doing. I have outcomes of games, and performance is huge, right? So we can get all this physiological data, but if we don't have real outcomes or what we're trying to do, that's where we're going to struggle. So that's another pitch for Smartabase, and what we're trying to do is as much as we can embed performance metrics into Smartabase, and we have that physiological data and everything's housed in one place, then we can do some really fun things, right? So that's where we study athletes, is we've got a lot of that, so we can hopefully start answering some of those questions, and we've got a world-class rifle team at WVU that we're studying a lot of the cognitive effects on marksmanship and cool things, and we've got high performance in a lot of different sports. So we just kind of tease some of those out. And we have a pretty awesome lab that we built from scratch. If we want to do a really controlled study where I want to control for nutrition, I want to draw a lot of blood, I want to maybe do some muscle biopsies or some crazier stuff that we can't do in other populations, just understanding that dynamic of, maybe they're not a world-class athlete, but we can dig into some answers, and then how can we translate that to what we're trying to do. And this is exciting too, is all of this new patient research that we have access to. So we've got unfortunately a massive chronic pain clinic right by us, and we're hit hard with the opioid epidemic, but it's a lot of things that a lot of our populations struggle with, right? Pain, addiction, coping, PTSD, TBIs. So we're doing a lot of research in that side with that same construct. So to Smartabase, right? So we kind of started this journey. Adam talked about it yesterday, a number of years ago. We went round and around, and we thought we had to do it from scratch, and talked to software companies and got quotes that made our heads explode, and like, oh man, we can't do this. But fast forward to now, like, we're doing it, and Smartabase is a massively flexible system to allow us to do all these things and be a force multiplier for us. So what's a little bit unique about what we do at the Rockefeller, now we're up to 4 builders, so I can have a little bit more time hopefully, but we get to collaborate with all these different groups. So obviously we have a pretty massive site at WVU that has all of our athletics, all of our clinical studies, all of our lab studies. So we do all of that, but we get to collaborate on different levels with a lot of different groups. So collaborating with SOCOM, actually leading a build from scratch with Navy Special Warfare, collaborating with Mark with the Lions, doing a lot of work that we'll show you with HIT. The guys from SOI East, Nick and Matt, we're doing a ton with them. And we have a big research project under ONR. So it's just finding goodness in all these things. And what's really neat is, like, once I develop or come up with something that I think is pretty cool with, say, NSW, then I apply that to athletics or vice versa. So it's a really nice collaborative environment. So I want to show you a little bit about our process of how we're thinking about on the military side, right? There's a lot of different things that we're trying to understand and a lot of different needs for the tactical operator. So now we're kind of thinking about all that. So I think we've kind of lived in this domain for a long time, understanding how to train, understanding physical effects of things. But now getting into the cognitive side, psychomotor, and we're huge in recovery. So all these different things we're trying to do and capture a lot of different data. And the ways that we can do that are just understanding all the different physiological metrics that we can potentially capture, which are important from a scientific perspective, but what are the technologies that allow me to actually do that and do fieldable applied research studies? So I kind of wanted to at least take an approach, and I've showed this a few times, so apologies if you've seen it, but just kind of thinking about, why are we doing it? Like, what's our culture from a R&I perspective, and how we're trying to get at this, and what's something that could potentially, reach out and translate to all these different other communities that we're trying to work with. And we kind of look at, and this is inspired on things that we talked about with Mark for the last 5 years, we really center on this recovery space. Right? So if we've got a day in the life of an operator, an athlete, a high-performing executive, low-performing executive, whoever it might be, we've got all these different ways that we can quantify that recovery stress state. And Mark's talked about this forever, and that was the inspiration behind this, is stress is stress, right? So you're going to accumulate that emotional, physiological, cognitive stress. So if we have ways to measure that, understanding how our body is responding or not responding to that, and how do we get better, right? And so I learned this early on with Ohio State, of thinking of like, okay, once we have that data, what are we going to do with it? How can we help the athletes? I thought, like, first thing we can do is change training. And they're like, Sir Urban Meyer, you're not changing training. Training is going to be training. Like, if you say that, you should never come back. And same thing with the group that Mark was working with, like, you're going to train hard. They're going to go on missions. They're going to do their thing. I said, okay, well, what can we do? We can really dial in this recovery. And can we actually help that balance? Because you're going to train really hard every day. You're going to train hard tomorrow. If we can modulate that, great. But if we can't, how do we manage that white space of recovery? And then we all know, kind of, if we don't do that right and we have an imbalance, bad things can happen, right? So with high performers that are training really hard, we can be under-recovered all the way up to overtrained and burnout. And we can get burnout with everybody, right? So it doesn't have to be just physical training, but this is what we're trying to avoid, right? And I think that we can do that. And I want to talk about a couple technologies. So I will talk positive. So any technology I'm going to show you, we're using very deliberately, right? And so we test a lot of things, use a lot of things. I'm going to tell you less about what doesn't work. I'm going to tell you what does work and what we're using. But we're very fluid with this. Like, if something better comes out, like if something better than Smartabase comes out, sorry guys, in 12 months, like we have to adapt. That's our responsibility to just pick the best thing. But with wearables, it's the same thing. So we're making pretty quick pivots. So Rachel alluded, maybe not, to some data yesterday. I think this is a game changer for us. And I guess full disclosure, we have no affiliation with any company or all that blah, blah, blah. I thought I had less red tape going to academia, but we actually have maybe more. So I literally can't take any funding from any place and all that good stuff. So I just use what's best, right? Well, I think this is a game changer, is the data we're testing on this, and we'll have publications that'll come out. It's hitting that accuracy mark, that high accuracy mark, which is great. We got to do that. But the logistics, the form factor, the usability of these things is hugely important, right? So if we're trying to get athletes and operators to buy into things, like, it helps to have something really futuristic and something that looks pretty badass. And by the way, it works really well. It's easy to use, good battery life, good price point, like all these good things, right? And so that helps us a ton, because if I'm not now saying, like, oh, you don't have to do all these things, like, it's not going to take you 20 minutes in the morning to do all this stuff I need you to do. I can get most of it out of here. That's great. And so we get really important information. And when I think about sleep as being, the most important factor in recovery, and it's, again, just knowing what we can really do. So Rachel said, like, if I want to know to the minute how much deep sleep you're getting, there's one way to do that, and it sucks. There's some take-home methods that are a little bit easier. But what can I possibly change? And this hit me as at the USOC about a year ago, and their sleep doc, and I'm like teching out, and I just try to get, like, I want to the minute deep sleep. He's like, no, what we can impact is how much time do you spend in bed? Are you getting that right? So if I have a technology that can tell me like almost exactly how much time you're spending in bed, that's step one. You've got to make that, like, if you're not in bed 8 hours or more a night, you've lost the battle, right? You can't be in there 6 hours and get 8 hours of sleep. So that's pretty simple. So if I understand that, great. If I understand sleep efficiency, so how much are you sleeping while you're in bed, that's my next massive goal, is to really understand that. And if we can trust that, I want to dial that in, because that has everything to do with, time in bed is pretty easy to figure out, like, that's an easy thing you can do. Efficiency is about the choices you make before you go to bed, right? And mindfulness and meditation and breathing and nutrition and all these things. So we're kind of trying to set up the infrastructure to be able to do your own individual clinical studies on yourself, right? And so we can do that with Smartabase, with capturing the data, doing the analytics, and we just saw something pretty awesome with we've got our soccer team, all wearing Oura rings. They're doing all our recovery stuff, and we just kind of took a quick look, like, okay, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, float therapy, when they float, any impacts on sleep that night, and we just pulled all that data. Like, I just told Rachel, like, holy cow, it's on average 24% reduction in sleep latency. And that's because Smartabase put all that data in there, and literally I sent it to Jad, and like 10 minutes later we had an answer because it was just some idea we came up with, and like, we've got that, right? So that's enabling us to do pretty quick things. Like I know every time I float, I feel like I sleep better, but I've got objective data to now start telling me that. So other important things that we get out of the ring are, it's not just sleep. Resting heart rate when you're sleeping, massively important. Heart rate variability when you're sleeping. You can do spot heart rate variability, all sorts of fun stuff. So I want to see if you can pick out the night that I drank bourbon. Anybody got a guess? So this enabled me to make a poor life decision and then make a better decision the next night. So I had a really stressful talk last Saturday. I did all right, and I relaxed a little bit, and Ohio State crushed Nebraska, and I had fun with that. And that's what happened to my readiness Z-score and my HRV Z-score. So I had a long flight back. I was stressed out. When I got home, I wanted to drink some more bourbon, but I looked at my data. I was like, that's a poor life decision. I made a good life decision, and look what happened Sunday night, so I feel better about myself. So, but it's, again, just trying to, like, once you see your own data, like, I want you to make better decisions. And I showed this on Thursday, but we now have the API working pretty well, so now we can automatically get data coming in, and I think it's turned out to be a pretty useful dashboard, and we're still working on it, but so I've got a whole team of athletes, and so they pretty quickly, strength coach AT can go in there and see, like, team averages are important. So I just want to know how the team's sleeping and how that compares to their 28-day average and what their Z-score is off of that. So we're kind of looking, very quickly at sleep quantity, that recovery score that factors in all that important stuff, resting heart rate, skin temp, HRV, all that good stuff, and then resting heart rate's huge. So you kind of see the team, and then I can see every single athlete and see if I have any issues with the athletes, and then I can dive in deeper to them. All right, I want to show you something cool that, so this comes from the brain of Andrew Thompson, right? So I didn't have much to do with the design of this. I had a lot to do with not sleeping for a few days when we actually did this, so I feel like I contributed. But cool idea came up, and Smartabase was a massive enabler to this. So this is the HIT Championships, high-intensity tactical training with the U.S. Marine Corps. I think it was maybe not even 3 months ago, the director of HIT called Andrew, was like, hey, we're doing this big, it's like the CrossFit Games for the Marines, right? So out of all the Marines, they got to qualify, go do this 4-day crusher. It's like, what if we redesign it, make it a lot more tactically focused, and what if we, as they said and Colonel Bentley said, science the shit out of it. So we just wanted to just holistic monitoring, and Smartabase was like the key enabler, like everything's going to pump in here. We're going to do maybe some legit analytics. We had high expectations, and we learned a lot, but I think this was a great example of what we could actually do. After we recover, I think we're still recovering. But reflecting back on what it was, like, this is a massive undertaking, and there were a lot of things that I learned out, like, just watching it happen and watching us. Like, we went into this we want to do predictive analytics because we got really nice. This is a competition, right? So we know how people are doing. and all of the different challenges that Andrew and Jake Alexander designed. Again, all very physiologically taxing, but tactically focused. So some of the cool things that they designed and that we did is we did these AM readiness assessments. So every morning at 6 a.m. or some days 5 a.m. Meet at the hotel, and we would do all of these morning assessments. So they would come in. All of the athletes would do a resting heart rate variability together using first beat, the QRT. So we got nice autonomic nervous system balance data for every single athlete. Went outside, did a dynamic warm up, and then it had different stations. So we had 4 stacks. So we did counter movement jumps, unloaded, loaded for every single athlete. We did mobility, Y balance, sit and reach, and then they also did a cognitive test. So we got an app that we designed that's got the psychomotor vigilance task, flanker task, and back task. So we got legit cognitive data as well. So every single morning they did all of this. And then at night, so we have them wearing Oura rings, doing all sorts of subjective stuff. We had all sorts of surveys as well, but everything being fed in with Smartabase. So we're understanding all of their kind of sleep physiology from Oura, morning autonomic nervous system status, cognitive status, and we had real results to go with, right? So we know exactly how they did. What was really cool about this is what happened on the health and safety side. So we went in on Sunday with corpsmen and event directors and people. It was 100 degrees in Quantico for 4 days. It's pretty brutal, and these are really hard events. Went in on Sunday. Nobody knew anything about any technology, had never seen any of this stuff before. By Monday afternoon, corpsmen were using that live physiological monitoring data to take care of those athletes and understand from a health and safety status what was going on with those athletes. So we had live physio streaming from Zephyr and First Beat, and it became a triage tool for health and safety assessment in the field. And then what happened the next day, and we did have some heat issues, and I mean it was a brutal event. The first day was just it was rough. The next morning, we did this morning triage where we used Smartabase, and we had all that data coming in from sleep, heart rate variability, load, heart rates, and they would come to us and say, these are the athletes that we're worried about from the eye test and what happened yesterday. We'd come back to them and say, these are the athletes that we have concerns with just looking at their data from a data perspective from HRV and sleep, and then we would set out for the day. So, okay, these are the athletes we need the extra set of eyes on. You're gonna have a corpsman next to that athlete. When they go in their wave, we got their physio data pulled up, and that's from, they didn't know that existed the day before, into actually using that into actionable data. Fast forward a little bit here. So I've got about 5 more minutes left. So what I want to go to is a little bit on football and what we're doing, and then I'll get into some of the prescriptive recovery and fun stuff that's happening within Smartabase. I talked about this a little bit on Thursday, but this is getting to the culture and the philosophy and the buy-in. And this was created entirely by our football staff. We just fancied it up when they handed it to us. But this is how they educate their players and their staff. And it's all about how do I make you a better football player? And you're doing all this stuff because we want to make you a better football player. And understanding the positives and negatives and decisions that you make as a player, how's that going to fit in? And each one of these icons is a piece of technology or piece of information. So how does that information fit into this and make you a better athlete? So just educating them of like, this is why I'm wearing GPS. This is why I'm doing HRV. This is why I'm wearing a sleep sensor. And so it all kind of fits in. But again, it's about how do I make you a better athlete? And then we kind of looked at, so this is our second year going into football. But this was our process, right? So year one, again, culture was built. I had nothing to do with that, right? So they had all of that. They were collecting a bunch of data. We changed out a couple sensors and did a couple different things, but we collected a ridiculous amount of data. And my first goal was to optimize that workflow, right? So I saw my strength coach was spending 2 hours a day in Excel doing something. We could save that time. So we turned that down to a couple of minutes and let him spend more time on the floor taking care of his athletes. So that's kind of our first ticket in, is like, I need to make your life easier. And then that just kind of helps everything. And so then the other big thing we did is we had iPad kiosks at every single recovery station. So now I'm tracking exactly who's doing what, when, again, all going into Smartabase. iPad, Smartabase kiosk at cryo stations, float tanks, Normatex, all sorts of things. So now I know exactly what's happening because I've got eyes off. So we did 5,200 recovery modalities last year. And now this year, we took some knowledge from running the analytics and basically designed our dashboards based on their data, their outcomes. But now we've got them very specific for football so they can use them. So let me fast forward here and kind of show you that some of the results of that. And I talked about this Thursday as well, so I'll just do this real quick. What we kind of came up with is they had two critical parts of their day: morning, post-practice. So morning, we came up with this morning check set of pretty monster calculations and dashboard where the first thing they do is they log into this every morning, and that's a summary of what happened yesterday. So what are the most important things? And I love what Marcus said the other day. So it's, I don't have a clinical study to show me these are exactly what we need to look at, but they are great practitioners. And they said, like, these are the important things I need to look at from a practitioner perspective. And we designed all those calculations to do that. So I don't have AI, I don't have machine learning to do this yet. Maybe in 5 years we'll have that. But this is how do I enable them to take a bunch of data, bunch of athletes, action it. Who do I need to worry about right now? And then we can take a deeper dive into, okay, what's really going on with all these different flags and alerts, and take a time series look at those. So the super fun part, I want you guys to all memorize this. This was a beast, but the concept of this, we designed this with Mark and his old group, but I love the way it came out. It was a brutal long time of all the calculations and stuff like that. I learned a lot, but really what I want to do is how do I digitize Mark's brain, right? So world-class practitioner that knows what to do when an athlete is in front of them or an operator is in front of them. And again, to that, just best practices. What would happen if you had an operator that came in and you saw their sleep data and it was this? What would you then tell that athlete? So we can actually code calculations and alerts and prescriptive things to do in the system based on practitioner knowledge. So that's what this is. It's like, okay, tell me everything that we're worried about from every piece of technology coming in. Give me a priority level, like what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? They got injured and didn't tell anybody. What's the least important thing? And we scaled all of that. So the idea is that any one of these flags that show up, and a lot of them are based on Z-scores, so it's individually focused, right? So I need to know if you're changing based on your data. And so that's going to show up in a mobile dashboard, but then there's also going to be recommendations on what to do: primary, secondary, tertiary recommendations, all practitioner designed. A lot of it's literature based, but world-class practitioners saying this is what I need to do. And we got dashboards to show that, and then automated email alerts that are going to go to the staff that need to know if this happened in this operator's data. I need to know, right? So we got all that working. It was brutal. Some of these guys have cleaned up some of the calculations after seeing it, like, dude, what are you doing? But it worked, and then you fast forward to this, right? And so this is, I think, the most important part on the military side is how do we feed that data back to the athlete or the operator, right? So that's where buy-in comes in, culture comes in, and that's where I think we made massive inroads, and we've even done it with some pro athletes. We're just showing them simple data, but as long as something is going back to that operator, what's that hook, right? So compliance is huge. How do I get you to do a morning wellness questionnaire every day when you might not think it's all that important? Seeing your own data and being compliant to your own data, and having this mobile dashboard that we designed that shows you these are all the alerts that happen in your, like, this is actionable stuff in your own personal data. This is what happened. This is what you should go do. And this is all your historical data. So I do this myself, and I hate when I have gaps and bars that aren't there, because, like, what happened in that data? And so far, I think we're getting pretty high buy-in from that. All right, last couple things, and I'll jump off of here. So this is where we're heading, right? And so we had, man, I got to take those out. Right, so we have a lot of things we can do in the recovery side. Fair amount of things that we understand, a lot that we don't understand, right? And so we're trying to create these knowledge products that, being completely transparent, and I'm going to tell you about some modalities, like, man, I don't know. Literature's 50-50, and we need to do more studies. But that's what's going to drive our R&D and say, like, we don't know the answer to this. We're going to dive into it, and that's going to help us design these studies to figure it out. But all those alerts and recommendations need to be based off of good science, things that have been done. If it hasn't been done, we've got to do it. We have to understand it in your populations and then code it in. So this is going to be an ongoing document, and we're going to work on a review paper and put this out. This is kind of where we're at right now. But we want people to understand, like, this is what these things do, and this is when we should do it, and be transparent. Like, man, I don't know. This is the best that we know right now, but we're working on it to get this better. But we've got to have some answers. I can't just say, like, I don't know, go do whatever you want to do. We don't know. That's not acceptable. We got to say, this is what we know, and this is where we're headed. And so at the Institute, what we're trying to do, so I'll just, last thing, I know I've said that a lot, but probably the two ones that I'm most excited about, and this is what's driving our research projects at the Rockefeller. And again, translating that into direct, actionable information so you guys know how well this works. So the two I'm most excited about, photobiomodulation. It is not a tanning bed. It looks like one. You will not get tan in it. I guess maybe you stay in it long enough, you might. So this is red near infrared light and this actually affects you on a cellular level. This has been studied for 50 years, so we know the mechanisms, we know how well it works. What's different is we've got companies that are now making this so you can buy it, right? So whole body photobiomodulation is a little bit different. People have done tons of studies with LEDs on quads and hamstrings and done beautiful, hundreds of them. So they're all saying the same thing, where you precondition with this and you get stronger and you recover faster. Tons of blood biomarker data like lower CK, lower inflammation markers, and you're stronger at the same time. So there's so much goodness out of this, but we've got to do studies with whole body PBM. So so actually at lunch, we're gonna have an important meeting with a couple people in the room to really help us dial in this acute performance study that we're doing right now. That we're running subjects, but we want to make sure that we're doing it well and answering those questions and understand how this really affects every energy system and how do we use this. And there's lots of other things and literature to support chronic pain, health and wellness, all sorts of other just amazing, TBI, PTSD. It's all been written. Like Mike Hamlin out of Harvard has done a lot of really amazing studies on this. So this is not something we're just throwing in a wall saying like it might work. We do need to understand a little bit more now that the paradigm is changing, and now we can think about doing this every day. We can think about different ways to do this and different populations to do it. So a lot more to come on that. We're literally just starting the studies now. And then I'm a massive homer for float. I didn't know what this was till I met Mark. And by the end of the second day when I was visiting him, I saw these guys going in and out of these rooms all day long. And finally I was comfortable enough with him to say, like, what's happening back there? And they're float tanks, and they've been doing it forever. I was actually at a float conference last week, and there's exciting things happening here, right? It's been studied since the 80s and lots of trippy, hippie stuff that's been done. But there's a lot of really great physiology that's happening in float tanks. And so we got two at our place. AFRL has one. We've put them in every place that we know. What we're just literally starting right now is we're doing in-float physiology. So we actually have EEG going on in the float. We have EKG going on in the float, subjective information pre and post. I've done it hundreds of times, and what's important to me is I know it's always a good thing to do, and there's always good things that happen, unless you get salt in your eyes or do something dumb in there. But I need to know like exactly what's happening in there. So it's a lot, or very similar to sleep, and that's why the EEG is important. Like I need to know what's happening to your brain while you're in there, because you can get a lot of great benefits out of it. We need to understand more, but this is one of those few things that if anybody asks me, and I get asked all the time, like, what should I buy? I have a budget. I need to know what to buy. This is always my go-to, is like, buy floats first, because I know it works. I've heard a million studies of why it works. It's got some science to back it up, but like, buy these. Like maybe you don't need that $100,000 GPS system. Buy 3 or 4 of these first, because I can tell you this is gonna work. I can't tell you what you're gonna get out of your GPS data. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. But we got tons of great studies going on. Again, chronic pain, performance enhancement, ANS modulation, sleep optimization is huge, right? Sleep is the #1 factor in recovery. And I mentioned that soccer data, but that's just the first mini one that we're doing. But now we're actually, taking subjects off the street, and what happens when you start floating 2 days a week, and how does that affect your sleep physiology and your inflammation biomarkers and all this good stuff. So I think I've taken up a little bit too much time. I'm going to hit this again and hope I have a bunch of hits on that survey later. Love to chat. I'll be here all day and all night tonight, and appreciate everybody's time. Thanks.